Welcome to Write Out Loud, the podcast about writing, storytelling, creativity, and inspiration. This week we had a small hiccup wherein we could not record a new episode. Worry not, however. We have a truly great episode geared up for you, and next week we have a very special guest. We can't wait to share it with you. This week, though, we wanted to do a replay of one of our favorite episodes from a previous season. From Season 1, we bring back Episode 10 entitled The Little Details. This is a look back at all the minute details in Heartstopper that you might have missed, and really how they add to the visual aspect of storytelling. So, enjoy the episode. We'll be back next week, and thanks, as always, for listening. We might be on introduction part 37. We don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see how it goes.
No, we can't do that. Bisexual lighting.
You're listening, and you have thoughts, and you want to share them with us. We love that.
Oh, sure. Put me on the spot. Why don't you?
Susie sells seashells by the seashore.
No, she doesn't.
Because it's going to be great. I think you're going to enjoy the heck out of it. Welcome, everybody, to Writing Out Loud. Just kidding. Welcome, everybody.
Sometime I think you should leave some of these intros in that were mistakes and us laughing because you know what? It's enjoyable.
It is enjoyable. Welcome, everybody, to Write Out Loud. That's the name of this podcast, and it's the one that you chose to listen to, so I should probably get the name right. My name's Matt Kassam, and this is
Tina.
The lovely, the magnificent, the wonderful, the brilliant Tina.
Oh,
I know.
I should have you mix up your intros more often. I think I got more compliments than ever.
Well, you know, you're worth complimenting, darling. Oh, goodness. So I'm excited because I think we found a topic again this week. You know, again, we're talking about Heartstopper. We're talking about writing and how this all comes together. But what I really thought was kind of interesting was we talked about getting into the minutia, the little tiny details that aren't actually part of the story, and yet they drive the story because they're not front and center, right? They're those things in the background that just sort of happen, that just sort of add a little bit of color and flavor to the story and bring it to life even that much more. And sometimes they influence you without you realizing them. So what I'm referring to is just those tiny details, right? And I know you and I have had conversations about some of these in the past, just based on things we found.
Yeah.
I found a BuzzFeed article from Tessa Fahey that is the 33 Heartstopper details that are small and clever, but you might have missed them the first time. I think what's really cool about this, we're not necessarily going to go through it all in, top to bottom. We're just going to talk about a few of the ones that really kind of stood out to us. And I think also then relate that back to this is a show, right? You can do things like that with a visual medium.
Right. You can also do it with writing. I mean, it's if you think about, again, your favorite books, your favorite series, the ones you read over and over again. I know one of your favorites is Harry Potter.
Yes.
You think about the things that you remember that aren't necessarily plot points or character. The little details that stand out to you are usually the things that are added, later. But the little details are really just the little cursive thing at the end of a sentence, just the little flourish, calligraphy, what have you. It's what makes it stand out to the reader.
It's the confetti at the
party.
party.
And like I said, your favorite, it's the what?
The confetti at the party.
Yes.
Right? The pop of the champagne cork.
Yep. It is that thing that just makes you quote the line, the detail that makes you go, oh my God, how brilliant is this writer? It's so funny that, we should bring this up because I had an edit over the weekend that we got to chatting about one particular thing, and that was the hero's nickname for the heroine. And she let it there. It happened. And then it was she kind of used it randomly. And I'm like, no, use it on purpose. Use it in a way that like the audience is going to take away, oh my God, this is the cutest nickname ever. Instead of sweetheart, darling, babe, those, it was this thing that made it stand out from the rest. That's the kind of details we're going to be talking about. The things that just make whatever it is stand out just a little bit more. It's the exclamation point on the end of the sentence.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I love it.
Yeah.
One of the things you had sent to me, and this is actually number one on the list, the tree on the Truum school uniform, right? Actually blossoms as the seasons change and as their romance kind of blossoms, which is a really fun little detail, right? And again, it just kind of draws your attention without even realizing it, that it's doing that.
Yeah.
And just kind of makes that feel a little bit more like you're watching everything grow.
Yes. And the thing is that I think I read it on Tumblr somewhere. Someone said, hey, anybody notice this? And then, upon one of my other rewatchings, I did take note of it. And it was, again, it's one of those flourishes that if you miss it, it's not a big deal. It's not going to affect anything in the story. Mm-hmm. But when you know about it, it makes the story that much fuller.
Mm-hmm.
And I was looking through your 33 list, and the number 2 right after it is that in the tree picture, the patch, it has spades.
Mm-hmm.
But during the fantasy sequence, Charlie's fantasy with Nick, it turns to hearts. I mean, how clever is that?
Yeah.
How clever is that?
Yes.
It makes me think of, these aren't the things. Now, I haven't looked through the entire list, but I can imagine just even kind of paging through it. These weren't things that were generally written into the script. These were things that happened afterward, either with the cinematographer, the set designer, the costume designer. Probably the costume designer's like, hey, I got this idea, That's why, specifically with this type of writing, television movies, it really is a collaboration. It starts with the script, but it finishes with all of the other co-creators within that. In a way, that's partially true with the book. It is a solitary endeavor, but the way I work with my clients, and I've got to imagine this is this way with other editors, there are things that we notice that maybe the writer didn't notice because they're too close to the work.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like I said, with my edit this weekend, we discussed the whole nickname thing. And my goodness, I can't wait for draft 2 because I know she's going to do something up real good with this and even take it beyond what I had even suggested.
Yeah.
But yeah, it comes down to the little details that just make it more full. I would also equate, like you were talking earlier, this Heartstopper is television, so it's easier to see details. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, with writing, it's the same way that, so for instance, we may not have noticed, the audience didn't notice these things maybe upon first watching, and then we realize it and, then it becomes fuller.
Sure.
With a manuscript, I often tell my clients that these details that you come up with, they don't necessarily have to be in the manuscript, but if you know them, the characters become fuller. Mm-hmm. The plot becomes fuller. Everything becomes fuller because you know all these little details and you can weave them in or leave them out, but it makes the writing more full. And that's why little details are important.
Yeah. Thinking about the writing in this one, right? It would be really easy for this particular situation. Like we have a patch that has a tree that kind of grows, blossoms, blooms throughout the series as that romance grows. I do think that you can weave a visual like that into a written story as well, where you can have maybe it's a love story about, 2 younger kids who live in the same neighborhood. And the protagonist basically maybe has a tree that's out in the backyard and it's their favorite tree and they like to go out and sit by it when they're thinking. And this tree could potentially change over time, maybe not necessarily as linearly as
Yeah.
blooming, right? But it could be like, oh, this tree is really, really full and green when everything is going swimmingly. And then when there's
Yeah.
things that aren't going well, we're at a period where the tree is now maybe a little bit more barren. It's just not as full.
Well, it also comes down to what we were talking about in previous episode, show versus tell.
Mm-hmm.
When you add those kinds of details, like you were just suggesting, that is show.
Mm-hmm.
That's not telling us that the seasons are changing. That's showing us here the season has changed, or something with the story has changed because the tree changed.
Sure. You were saying too something about this show and the use of color. Let's talk a little bit about that, because it shows up on the list quite a few times that there are different aspects of color used in the show to signify different things. What are some of the things that you found?
Well, the first one that really stands out, and I noticed this aspect definitely on the first watch, and that's the blue yellow with Charlie and Nick. They each have a representative color. And I read later, probably again on Tumblr, that someone suggested that when they were together, so Charlie's bedroom, specifically the bed sheets, the comforter, were yellow in the beginning, and then they became green when Charlie and Nick were together, because yellow and blue make green. I don't know if I recognize that myself. I don't know if maybe it's my apps that I'm watching Netflix on that maybe didn't quite have the same color. But I think it's a great idea. And I think that they do use the use of blue and yellow. And in fact, the biggest one that comes to mind is when Nick comes over in the rain, he doesn't have an umbrella. Charlie gives him the umbrella, and the umbrella is exactly half yellow, half blue.
Yep.
Again, I don't know specifically what significance blue and yellow might represent, but I think something that you noticed with the coloring was the bisexual coloring in the party scene.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people had pointed it out at the bowling alley, but you had noticed it in the party scene along with the rainbows when it showed Tara and Darcy and their dancing and their kiss. But when it showed Nick, you said it was pink and blue.
Yes, it was basically, pink, blue, and purple across him. And it was a little bit more subtle. Like in the list here, it's number 11 on the list, and it captures some good stills of that color variance there. But when it goes to Tara and Darcy, it is in your face rainbow. Like it is all over. You cannot miss it, right? Where you might have missed the coloring on Nick if you weren't really looking forward to paying attention to it. So it's interesting. And I think color in general just does a lot. I mean, there's obviously tons of research on color theory and what colors do, for someone who's looking at them.
Right.
So it's interesting that you can also use it to kind of tell a narrative.
Yeah. I do think specifically for Heartstopper, the use of colors in every aspect. Again, I don't know whether it comes down to all of the different people that are contributing. I do know that something that I noticed immediately on the first watch was all of the cinematography rainbows, not just the ones that were put in the background or whatever, but specifically with the camera flares and looking at different things and the rainbows that were showing up. All of that really contributes to the story. And again, I don't know if that was something that was written into the script, but I've got to imagine it wasn't. And that because all of the people that were working on Heartstopper are LGBTQ plus positive. I can't say that everybody on set, is affiliated with LGBTQ, but I do know that they were very specific in the people that they hired, knowing that they were really going all in with Heartstopper. So, and I think the director, along with the producer, I think both of them are gay men. Again, I don't know everyone that worked on the film, obviously, but I think that you can't work on a show like this, be the cinematographer, and say, I'm going to use these rainbow lens flares because that's, yeah. So it really took a real talent, a real specific eye and creativity to put on something like this with those kinds of things. And especially, again, not just with the lens flares and the rainbows in the background and the backdrop
Right.
of a lot of different scenes, but like you said, that blue, pink, and purple, the pride colors when Tara and Darcy kiss, that's very deliberate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of those little things too, I think, that come out with colors, with, again, those doodles, right? Because we know that that's a very heart-stopper thing from
Oh,
the
yeah.
graphic novel. They come out, and the list kind of does a good job of pointing it out too in places I hadn't noticed. Like, for example, 15, Elle's sports day makeup has little comic-style doodles on her face. She got a star and a little heart.
Yeah.
There is a scene where they are in the music room. That's when Tara and Darcy actually kiss for the first time. And instead of, not just like the little hearts, but and the little like sparky things, but also music note.
Yes.
Which is kind of cool.
Yep. Yeah.
So it's just,
they're both
neat again.
musicians.
Yeah. And that was, I think, one of my favorite little details that was probably less little, just given the fact that it was right there, like kind of in your face when it happened, right? You saw those little doodles happen. But like, for example, when Nick first really wants to hold Charlie's hand, really badly wants to hold his hand, and every time he gets close, it's just like that. I mean, it's tactile. Like, you can absolutely feel it as the person watching the show, because you've been there before. You can relate to that. Like, I know that feeling where I'm like, I want so badly, but I can't.
Yep. I was just going to say that. It's palpable.
Yes.
And you're like, ooh, I can literally feel the heat.
Yep.
And the excitement of that. Ooh, I really want to hold her hand. And yeah. Yep. Yeah, I love all of those. I did notice I got the movie tie-in comic because that's what was available here in the US right away. And I did notice in the back, they have a few pages from the script, and she actually calls those heartstopper moments. And then she'll describe it. So that was actually written into the script.
Okay, that's cool.
That was actually written into the script. Yeah. And that actually really did translate well from the comic to screen. So that was something that they did really, really well.
Yeah, that's awesome.
What are some other things that you noticed from that list that were really obscure?
I mean, I think there's a couple of them. I think, number 26, Elle wears some outfits that are light blue, light pink, and white, like the trans flag. I can't say that I noticed that as much personally, but like reflecting on it and kind of thinking about some of the scenes that I do remember. I do, but I like too that there were two different scenes where there are butterflies, and I didn't know this. So this is something new, that I learned, but butterflies are symbols for the trans community. And so I thought that was
I didn't know that either.
Very, very interesting. Yeah. Like in the classroom, there's two gigantic butterflies that are on a big sheet of paper. And then there's some little ones in the window as well, like kind of totally covering that window. And again, hues of like pink and blue and,
Yep. It's interesting because I did notice the trans flag colors, but that's just because I knew the colors of the trans flag and some of that stuff. I did not know about the butterflies. I had noticed the butterflies, but I thought of that as more as transformation because I saw Ellie and Tao's relationship more as an evolution thing. It wasn't something that started from the very beginning or anything like that, or what some people call a slow burn.
Yeah.
Friendship into a little bit more of a romance. So I think I attributed the butterflies to that, but I love that has that dynamic of trans representation. That's wonderful.
Yeah, it's really, really cool. I also think when we first started talking about this and then into prior to recording this, one of the things that I mentioned was like, we should talk about, as we did with the first couple of them, like, how do you bring that to life in writing? How do you do that when it's not a visual medium? But I actually think it is much easier than I considered it to be, because I think you can have it would almost seem like a throwaway line in the book that Elle put on her pink blazer and started to walk towards the school. Her favorite denim overalls. Overalls. We have history there.
Yeah.
But her favorite denim overalls, being blue, just being able to kind of have, like, obviously you're going to do it much more eloquently than that, but you can call out those types of little
Yes.
details without making it seem obvious.
Yes. And the thing is, what I would recommend from my editorial perspective, you're not going to find those details most likely in the first draft.
Mhm.
You're still figuring out the story in the first draft. You're still figuring out character aspects. Some of the writers I work with call it layering. They've got to come back and layer, add those details, add the things. So those kinds of details are going to be more easily worked in the second or even in the third draft. I know a lot of people are like, one draft, let's fix the grammar and let's go. I do not ascribe to that. I am definitely I think you really need to have a minimum of 3 drafts before you can honestly say you really put out your best work.
Sure.
Because that second draft is really just kind of, the first draft is figuring out the story. A lot of writers say it's telling yourself the story first. And then you go back in the second draft and work out the kinks, work out the things, flesh out the characters a little bit more, make the plot a little more specific, not so loose. Make sure the flow of the story, like you're not top heavy where everything's happening in the beginning and then you're like drift off into the sunset. Yeah. And the third draft, that draft really is, if you haven't had a chance to work on the details, that's when you can absolutely add those layers and details. And like you said, if you wanted to add that aesthetic of Elle wearing the trans flag colors, you could literally add that in, like you said, in a more nuanced way than what you were describing. Yeah. Pink blazer with her blue jean denim overalls. Yeah, absolutely. And that actually adds another layer of that show versus tell. You're showing the audience Elle is proud of her colors, wearing them, indicating, and it can be one of those things. Maybe the audience at that point doesn't know that the character is trans and they have, added this piece that as it goes on gives more details and more volume to the character.
Yeah, I was thinking like it could
Absolutely.
absolutely be used as foreshadowing in a way as well, right? That's another
Oh, yeah.
good way to do it, is foreshadow some of the reveals that are going to come later. And again, most readers are not going to pick up on it right away, unless it's something really in your face obvious. But even then, most of the time, if it's done just in service of the narrative and kind of the description of the area, most people aren't gonna get it. I think as we kind of wrap this one up, looking at the number 32, it talks about how everybody's bedrooms represent their personalities. So literally,
Yes.
Charlie's room is cluttered, generally creative, full of references to his favorite books and music. Nick's room is neat and stereotypically masculine. Darcy's room is total chaos, and Tara's room is full of stuffed animals, right? And it fits those characters so well,
Yes.
based on what we know, right?
Yes.
Isaac's room is full of books. Tao's room is edgy and carefully curated. Elle's room is artsy,
Yes.
full of handmade decor. Like it's really kind of interesting. And again, something you can easily do for your characters in describing a setting for them, right? If it happens to further the narrative, describing the setting for that. Don't just do it just to do it, but
Absolutely. And again, those are adding more depth to the characters. Specifically with Tao, even though we don't really get to know him really well in the first season, we do know some things about him. I mean, he is an art house buff, film noir buff. He's the one who not only does he have the posters and stuff, but like, we're going to have a film night and it's not going to be Marvel, the Avengers style stuff. So yeah, there is a lot that you can add with those details that gives much more depth to the characters without really having them have to say a word.
Yeah, so I think the challenge this week is going to be all about How do you work in those little details? Like without rewriting a scene completely, how can you buff it to maybe add a few little details here and there that actually do serve as a little bit more depth for the character, or do serve as a little more depth to the story, describing the situation, describing the individual, again, without being in your face? It's those small details. So how do you do that? Think about that with your writing. And really, again, don't rewrite, just add to.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And in fact, I would take that challenge a little bit further and just say anyone who is working on their second draft and finishing up their second draft, or maybe they've set aside the second draft or handed it over to their editor or whatnot, take it and do it again and add some layers, add some more details, add some things to the character, to the descriptions, any of that kind of stuff, like you said, to add more depth. Absolutely.
Yes. Well, perfect. I think we've got a
Awesome.
lot to work with there, and we had some really fun conversation around that one. I liked it. I liked it a lot. So where, my dear, can they find you if they want to know more about Tina? They need more Tina. Where can they find you?
They can find me at bookmatchmaker.com. If you want to email me, it's Christina@bookmatchmaker.com. Otherwise, you can generally find me at Instagram hanging out. Do a lot with my stories there. You can find me at the other social media too, but I'm not always there, so you might not catch me. But yeah,
Perfect.
give me a DM.
Perfect.
And you, my dear, where can they find you?
I can always be found with all of the details at Cassem, CASSEM.omg.lol. Well, very good. Thanks again for a wonderful episode this week, and I'll look forward to hearing from all of you and from talking to you again next week, my dear.
Yes. Me
right.
too. Have a good one.
You too. Bye. Hey, thanks so much for listening to the podcast. We really hope that you're enjoying every bit of it, but we would love to hear your feedback. Drop us an email either to matt@writeoutloudpod.com or Christina@bookmatchmaker.com. We would love to hear your thoughts. What's working, what's not working, and what do you want to hear more of? Thanks so much. We really appreciate it.